He stepped out of his car to greet a stunning 20-year-old woman who had just emerged from a beauty salon. The girl, thrilled with her makeover, casually offered Mark her full, silicone-enhanced lips for a kiss and giggled as if enchanted. She pulled a small tub of sour cream from her bag, walked over, and calmly squeezed the creamy substance onto the flawless head of the woman, who froze in shock. Emily and Mark had been classmates in college. Emily was a slim, attractive woman, while Mark was an ordinary, slightly awkward guy. She lived in the city, while he had moved from a small town. Emily would never have noticed him, but she became curious about why so many girls seemed drawn to him, hanging on his every word, and even bringing him homemade treats. Emily couldn't figure out what was so special about him, and was sure she'd never fall for someone so plain. But she did fall in love, because Mark turned out to be an incredible person. He was witty, smart, kind, and could play the guitar like a pro. Most importantly, he had a way of making everyone like him. Within minutes of talking to someone, they'd agree with him, shake his hand if it was a man, or gaze into his eyes if it was a woman. But Mark chose Emily. It even flattered her that other girls swooned over him. She never felt jealous because she trusted his love and loyalty. They got married during their senior year, lived with Emily's mom for a while, and 3 years later, Mark's parents sold their grandmother's house in their hometown and bought them an apartment in the city. Now they could live on their own. Emily was thrilled and told Mark she wanted a child. But Mark hesitated, saying he wasn't ready to be a father. He talked about his difficult childhood, how he always looked forward to New Year's because he knew there'd be candy, even chocolate, in the gifts from school. His parents struggled. His father was often sick but wasn't granted disability, and his mother, who had no education, jumped from job to job. She'd worked as a nurse, a cashier, and even a ticket seller at the local theater. Mark remembered how they counted every penny and divided a loaf of bread to last 3 days. To this day, he couldn't drink sweet tea because he wasn't used to it. His mother claimed sugar was poison and never bought it. Mark was adamant that they needed to save enough money for a comfortable life before having a child. Emily thought differently. She knew plenty of couples who lived modestly but happily, raising kids. Love was what mattered most. But she didn't argue with Mark. She loved him too much and was willing to wait. They were still young, after all. Over time, Mark landed a good job in his field. A couple of years later, he got a raise, and a few years after that, he was promoted. He sold the apartment his parents had bought and upgraded to a bigger one. He became a respected figure in the city and convinced Emily to quit her job, saying he earned enough for her to focus on the house. At first, Emily was happy. Her job had been stressful, with a toxic team and a boss who made her uncomfortable. She quit without regret. At first, she threw herself into fitness classes and salon visits, but that quickly lost its appeal. Then Emily bought a cookbook and decided to surprise Mark with delicious meals every day. Cooking became her passion. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and occasionally running errands. She sometimes thought about having a child, but Mark always brushed it off. One morning, Emily made breakfast for him and waited for his usual morning kiss and a happy anniversary wish. But Mark ate a pancake and hurried out, as he had been doing lately, even forgetting to kiss her. Emily sighed, thinking he was overworking himself. This job was draining him, but for the sake of a child, he seemed willing to do anything, so she didn't hold it against him. After finishing his breakfast, Emily looked in the mirror and frowned. She was turning 37 this year. Wrinkles were forming around her eyes, and gray hairs were starting to show. She needed to take care of herself and talk to Mark about having a child. They couldn't wait any longer. It was too risky. Emily smiled. Maybe they'd start trying today. It was the right time in her cycle. She called her hairdresser, booked an appointment for noon, and then quickly cleaned up, defrosted some meat, and boiled vegetables for a salad. She decided to leave early to pick up a few things for the evening. At the store, Emily bought candles, wine, sour cream, and cheese, then headed to the beauty salon. That's when she noticed Mark's car parked outside. At first, she was delighted, thinking he'd remembered their anniversary and come to surprise her, but he was there for someone else. Emily froze and watched as Mark admired a young, glamorous woman. She even smeared sour cream from her bag onto the girl's head, and the girl froze for a moment before screaming so loudly that everyone turned to look. The girl, with her long manicured nails, lunged at Emily, but Mark grabbed her and shoved her into the car. He shouted to Emily that they'd talk at home and drove off. Emily stood at the salon doors, realizing there was no point in going in. She spent the rest of the day sitting on a stool in the kitchen, watching the defrosted meat she'd planned to cook for Mark slowly melt. A pink liquid dripped onto the floor, past the bottle of his favorite wine. When the first drop hit the ground, Emily shuddered, seeing Mark in the doorway. He glanced coldly at the raw food on the table, turned around, and went to the bedroom, shouting, "I'm leaving you!" Emily shivered and quietly cried. She sat there as Mark packed his things, and only when the front door slammed shut did she slowly get up and walk to the window. How many years had she spent waving goodbye to him with a smile as he left for work? Every morning he'd kissed her before leaving. How could she live without that now? The next day, Mark called Emily and said he'd fallen in love with someone else, just like that. "I know you've always been faithful to me," he added. "You love me, and I betrayed you, traded you for beauty. So after the divorce, I'll leave you the apartment and everything in it. I'll pay you every month, so you don't have to work. Live and be happy." Emily listened in silence. Live and be happy. Did he even understand what he was saying? She hung up and cried. Then she called her childhood friend, Natalie, and asked her to come over. She couldn't be alone anymore. Natalie understood something was wrong and rushed over, even though it was late. Sipping wine, Natalie looked at Emily with pity. "Young, huh? She'll stick around for a while, then dump him in about 10 years. Maybe sooner. Who knows?" Natalie hiccuped. Emily sobbed. "What should I do? All this time I wanted a child, a son. I wouldn't be so scared of being alone if I had a piece of the person I loved with me. But he never let me have a child. It's all my fault. Maybe that's why he stopped loving me, because there was nothing to keep us together." Natalie nodded, hiccuped again, and said, "I know what to do. You need to make him jealous." "Jealous?" Emily was surprised. "Of whom? Me? Of course not you, but of someone. We need to think about it." Natalie lay down on the couch, pretending to think, but within minutes she was snoring. Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, remembering her happy life with Mark. Suddenly, she screamed in fright, but then sighed in relief. It was just Natalie tiptoeing into her room. "You're not asleep?" she whispered, and then declared, "I've got it. There's a guy at work, Nick. He's a few years younger, but that makes it even better. He's great looking, divorced. His wife cheated on him with his cousin. He'll help us. We'll say you need to get back at your husband for cheating. Not for real, of course, but your husband won't know. When Mark sees you with Nick, he'll realize what he's lost. Men are possessive. And don't lose him. Get him into bed. Maybe he'll leave later, but you'll have a child. If it works, of course, but it's worth a try." Emily hesitated, but then imagined having a child with Mark and smiled. She agreed. The next day, there was no call from Natalie. Emily thought her friend had changed her mind, but didn't dare remind her. That evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Natalie, shouting loud enough for the whole building to hear. "Quiet!" Emily waved at her and then saw a tall, handsome young man behind her. He was staring at Emily, who blushed, realizing her makeup was minimal. "Emily, this is Nick. Nick, this is Emily," Natalie said importantly, then giggled. "You two look good together. Anyway, I've told Nick what's needed. You two can work out the details. I need to go." She winked and left. Emily was flustered. It had been a long time since she'd talked to a strange man. Remembering soap operas, she asked, "Would you like some coffee?" Then she added, "I also have meatloaf and cheesecake. I've been cooking a lot lately." "Meatloaf? That's amazing," Nick said, delighted. "The last time I had homemade meatloaf was when my mom visited. My ex couldn't cook, or maybe she was just lazy." "Is it with mashed potatoes?" he asked as they walked to the kitchen. Emily watched Nick eat her cooking with enthusiasm and smiled. Mark had always liked her cooking, but she'd never heard such praise from him. "Emily, you're a pro. It's so simple and so good. I've never had anything like this. Even my grandma can't compare." Nick leaned back, looking like a satisfied cat. "I'll do anything for you now. By the way, I can help around the house. Do you have a leaky faucet or a broken toaster? Don't hesitate to ask." Emily thought for a moment. He was so easygoing and fun that she wanted him to stay longer. She remembered her old broken hairdryer. While Nick tried to fix it, Emily told him about Mark. Nick listened quietly, but when she got to the part where Mark said he'd traded her for beauty, he was furious. What a jerk. For what beauty? Fake lips? Didn't he see you're a real beauty? He's blind. Emily blushed. Mark hadn't complimented her in years. She realized he hadn't been tender or caring for a long time. She thought it was because he was busy, but he'd simply replaced her with someone younger. A thought crossed her mind. Did she even need a child from him? But she told herself, yes, I do. I love Mark. And she told Nick what to do. The next morning, at Emily's request, Nick called Mark and said his Aunt Martha, who lived in Italy, had sent him a package of souvenirs and promised to hand it over at a restaurant at 8 p.m. Emily knew Mark's aunt adored him and often sent him gifts. She was sure he'd come. Emily arrived at the restaurant by 7:30. Nick was waiting at the entrance. When he saw her with her hair done, makeup on, and wearing a simple but stunning dress, he was speechless. He stared at her for a moment, then said, "You're breathtaking. I can't understand a man who didn't appreciate what he had. A beautiful, kind woman like you. I'd give anything for that." Emily didn't respond. She sighed and walked into the restaurant. They sat at a table, ordered coffee, and waited for Mark. He arrived on time, walking quickly into the restaurant and immediately spotting Emily, who looked radiant, next to a handsome stranger. Nick was holding her hand, and Emily was smiling. Mark forgot about the package and stormed over, leaning on their table and saying through clenched teeth, "I thought you were heartbroken. I left you everything, gave you money because I felt guilty, and you've already moved on? Maybe you've been doing this for a while. You can't find a lover in a couple of days." He turned to Nick and sneered, "I'll take everything. The apartment, the money. Will you still want her then? We'll see. And you, Emily, get out of my apartment tomorrow. It's in my mom's name, in case you forgot. Goodbye. See you at the divorce." And Mark left. Emily sat there, stunned, her eyes wide with shock. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. Nick tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, cried, and ran off.